Hey people, it's Naya Stokey. This is another Black Traitors video. The source I'm using is Mississippi History Now, Isaiah T. Montgomery, 1847 to 1924, Part 2. The Political Life of Isaiah T. Montgomery. Isaiah T. Montgomery might be called Mississippi's Booker T. Washington. Though Montgomery was not as famous or as influential, his life and work in many other respects closely paralleled to that of the great educator at Tuskegee Institute, a college for black people in Alabama. They were both fought by influential white people to be conservatives, safe and sensible African American leaders who understood that if the emancipated African Americans and their descendants were to get along in the Jim Crow South, they must go along with racial separation and black political disenfranchisement. Both were regarded by contemporary black militants, few of whom lived in the South, as faithless collaborators who sold out their people in the darkest hours of post-Civil War radical white racism. In fact, though Montgomery spent most of his adult life overshadowed by Washington, it was he, not the Tuskegean, who first won public prominence as the architect of an unequal bargain that seemed to trade the civic aspirations of African Americans for the empty white assurance of racial harmony. Half a decade before Washington offered his olive branch, his famous Atlanta Compromise Address of 1895, Montgomery delivered up his peace push, his conciliatory speech to the Mississippi Constitutional Convention of 1890, in which he accepted wholesale black disenfranchisement as the essential beginning of the end of the great race question. As historians now know, neither Washington nor Montgomery was what he then seen. Both were in fact complicated pragmatists who were misread by their white admirers and misunderstood by their black detractors. Race statesman or race traitor, this is a subheading. History would remember Montgomery not just as a town builder but also as a conservative race statesman who pursued racial harmony through accommodation. In some respects, he was an unlikely advocate of black disenfranchisement as a path to peace. He himself had regularly voted since the early days of Reconstruction at Davis Bend, when the freedmen first won the right to vote. His father and brother both held minor offices, and were very likely the first African Americans to hold public offices in Mississippi, and perhaps the entire South. After Reconstruction, Montgomery was well known and active in Bolivar County Republican circles, and his beloved Mount Bayou remained a faithful island of Republican loyalty in a sea of white Democrats. He served for a time as a town's mayor and later took more than a little pride in the fact that it elected its own public officials. He was elected as a Republican delegate to the Mississippi Constitutional Convention in 1890, and later accepted a federal political patronage job as a collector of government monies. But Montgomery was also an astute political observer, and he understood the realities of power in his time and place. Enfranchised by the 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution and technically allowed an equal opportunity to both vote and hold public office under the Mississippi Constitution of 1868, black people outnumbered whites once in every decade from 1840 to 1940. Clearly, in this black majority state of Mississippi, the first requirement of unchallenged white rule was black disenfranchisement. Having re-established white control by force and fraud in 1875, the White Line Democrats, or Redeemers they styled themselves, intended to dominate the political life of Mississippi by any means necessary. When accommodating federal government increasingly willingly to purchase North-South reconciliation by looking the other way, no prudent black Mississippian could ignore that fact. And Isaiah Montgomery, like his father before him, was nothing if not prudent. His father, Ben, chose his battles carefully. Eager to avoid racial conflicts that he could not hope to win, he made it his lifelong practice to cultivate friendships with influential whites. Ben set white people at ease by downplaying black political aspirations, by affirming that voting was of doubtful remote utility to the freedmen. Discussions of the suffrage question, he publicly asserted, are more likely to produce contention and idleness than harmony. These were calculated and soothing words, suggesting to white leaders, as one approving white newspaper editor put it, that Ben was a sensible darky and a good citizen who attends to his own business and does not dabble in politics. Isaiah, too, was a skillful actor in the ceremony of submission required of any African American who would stay right with white people. "This is a white man's country," Montgomery said more than once. "Let them run it." His advice to black Mississippians who still demanded their citizens' right to vote was equally direct. "The farther you stay away from the white people's politics, the better." It was not surprising then that Montgomery alone among black Republicans was allowed to represent his race. And I just want to stop you right here. I made another Black Traitors video talking about W.E.B. Du Bois and about how he was proven wrong in his whole philosophy of trying to appease whites. Well, I don't exactly know off the top of my head what he was talking about. And and I also made a video talking about what was it? The first Nuremberg laws in the United States, headed by Woodrow Wilson. And this is, I would advise you to watch those videos as a good complement to this, because people like Montgomery, Dubois were proven wrong in their lifetimes that integration wasn't working, that when black people began succeeding, whites would destroy it. Like I said, can't remember everything I said in those videos off the top of my head, but those are good compliments to this video. He was an elected... the further you stay away from the white people's politics, the better. It was not surprising then that Montgomery, alone among black Republicans, was allowed to represent his race and his party at the State Constitutional Convention of 1890. He was an elected delegate from Bolivar County, of course, but even casual observers of the Mississippi political scene could no longer have illusions about the integrity of the ballot box. According to one prominent judge, J.J. Chrisman, himself a leading member of the Constitutional Convention, it was no secret that there has not been a full vote and fair count in Mississippi since 1875. Once assembled, the convention's overriding purpose was plain to see. We came here to exclude the Negro, S.S. Calhoun, the body's president announced. Nothing short of this will answer. Montgomery was assigned to the Committee on Elective Franchise, and he spoke eloquently in favor of and voted for a measure to purify the ballot by restricting it to literate adult males, those he called the stable, thoughtful, and prudent element of our citizens. The burden of a literacy restriction, as he well knew, would fall most heavily on a people so recently freed from slavery. But he also knew that through education, illiteracy could eventually be eradicated, and he dared to hope. In the meantime, voter requirements would apply equally to both races, and that such disenfranchisement that would come to the Negro would come because he is ignorant, not because he is black. He was then just 43 years old, but it would be proved to be his defining moment and the single most controversial act of his long and complicated life. Now, this is what I want to talk about. Now, the reason I made this video right now was Professor Black Truth talked about black elected members in California voting against reparations. And here, Pro-Black Board Ford Free, who originally posted about Isaiah Montgomery, talked about how he said the same thing, that he wanted to keep the uneducated from voting. And keep in mind, this is what I want to talk about. The black elite, the talented 10th. The talented 10th are not the leaders of black society. They are the enemies of black society. The black elites view themselves as the overseers appointed by the white man on the plantation. You know, the plantation may have ended, but they're still mentally there. They think of themselves as the house slave that is keeping the field slaves in line. Master, the field slaves are organizing. Well, get out there and say something that will get them calmed down. You know, if you've ever seen the black cop from, Boys in the Hood, you know, the one who says, it's guys like you who give the rest of us a bad name. You know, the cop who's joined the force, hoping to keep the ignorant ghetto youths in line. That's how black elites view themselves, that they are securing their place in the world at the expense of the black masses. And this I want to also relate to people who lionize black Egypt. Oh, Kemet was such a great place. When they look at all the palaces and the pyramids, we had such a great time. The black Nesser and Netter, or whatever you want to call them, they lived a lavish life at the expense of the black man and woman on the streets of Egypt. They didn't give a damn about them. The same thing of black elites in America. Let's keep going. He was then just 33 years old, but it proved to be his defining moment and the single most controversial act of his long and complicated life. Actually, and I just want to finish this off with a last thought. You know, you get lots of people who keep talking about the first black this and the image. You know, they'll vote for people who openly say they don't want to do anything for them, like Kamala Harris, who is not black. I've never seen any video of her saying that she's black. But they keep saying, oh, I'm going to vote for the first black woman. Remember what Mitch McConnell said when it came to reparations. His standing on reparations was the same standing as Obama. Obama, who publicly repudiated reparations and said no. He said, hey, we had a black president who said no to reparations. These people, these black politicians, are put in place to stand there and act as a guard, keep the blacks from getting anything. When you have a black man standing there and says no, it makes us look like we're not racist. Hey, even the black ones don't want you to have anything. But why? Why was Montgomery elected as a delegate? Why was he willing to serve? Why did he support disenfranchisement? His presence at the convention is perhaps most easily explained. His conservative ideas were well known to powerful white political leaders, eager to point to his example as proof that the convention was fair and that black people too favored white supremacy. In a word, Montgomery provided cover, a measure of legitimacy, as Mississippi enacted the legal measures to subvert the 15th Amendment. Montgomery's own motivations and behavior are far more complex and have defied easy answer for more than a century. Some conservative black contemporaries applaud his tone of racial sacrifice, his singular act of statesmanship, but others recoiled in shock and horror, dismissing him as a great disappointment, a traitor, the Judas of his people. It was said that he was either so blinded by his ambition or so eager for white approval that he traded his vote for the empty favor of a seat at the convention, or that he bought immunity from white interference in the affairs of Mount Bayou with the coin of black suffrage, or more frequently that his actions were simply inexplicable as unfathomable mystery wrapped in a jungle of contrarieties. Yet examined in the context of his life and his times, his role at the convention seems neither treasonous nor puzzling, nor inconsistent. By supporting a white supremacist initiative, he offered a way to end the grave dangers of racial conflict, bridge an ever-widening and deepening racial chasm, and inaugurate an era of progress. The black right to vote in Mississippi, as he reasoned, had already been nullified by electoral fraud and by physical and economic coercion. By giving away rights they could no longer exercise anyway, Afro-Mississippians might gain the personal security and economic freedom necessary to advance themselves. First given a man's chance, having been allowed to prove their worth through right living, hard work, and practical education, the former enslaved and their descendants could expect someday to re-enter the body politic as equal citizens, free from the burden of racial prejudice. This is just laughable. So you think after giving up all your political freedoms, they're going to let you live in economic security? If they violate your freedoms, who are you going to complain to? It's not like you can complain to anyone. You can't do anything. You can't vote for them if they don't do anything. Or so Montgomery dared to hope. It was a long shot, but it was in all fairness the only shot Montgomery thought he had. No, it wasn't the only. You can just choose not to participate. It's like Professor Black-Truth said, black participation in the electoral system, this democracy, legitimizes it. If you withdraw from the system and refuse to participate, it loses legitimacy. Black votes continuously going out and voting for the lesser of two evils legitimizes those evils. And remember something I want you to know. It doesn't matter if you vote for the lesser of two evils, you will still go to hell. The suffrage restrictions of the new constitution, as he informed a northern newspaper just 2 weeks after his fateful vote, did not wholly suit me, but it was the best that could be done. We had to take the best that we could get. Of course, Montgomery's peace push, his fearful sacrifice laid upon the burning altar of liberty, was not the beginning of the end of the race problem. It did not, as he hoped, open the way in Mississippi political divisions upon some basis other than that of color or race. Clearly his faith in ultimate white good intentions was misguided, but to suggest that Montgomery's strategy of giving up to gain was fundamentally ill-conceived is not to prove that he had other realistic options. In time, Montgomery had second thoughts about his sublime sacrifice of 1890. He lived another 34 years, long enough to admit privately, though never in public, to a sense of betrayal, to a recognition that white supremacy in Mississippi sought nothing less than a retrogression of the Negro black towards serfdom and slavery. In a letter to Booker T. Washington, he acknowledged that white talk of pure government was a sham, that only armed federal intervention could restore colorblind democracy to Mississippi. To have said that openly would have been to speak against the very grain of his being. Not least, it would have swift and certain retribution for himself and his town. But by remaining publicly silent, he opened the way to the misunderstandings and the calumny that have dogged his reputation for more than a century. I mean, this is what Martin Luther King talked about. Life begins to end when you become silent about the things that matter. When Montgomery died in 1924, he was eulogized by a conservative white planter politician. Walter Sillers Sr. laid to rest in a tomb paid for by white subscription. Aside his circle of family and friends, however, he was largely unmourned. By that date, he was, in the words of a Northern missionary, more hated by Negroes than any other Mississippian of his race. It says something about you that, as a black politician, all the people who turn up and celebrate you outside of your immediate family and friends, or your white politicians. I mean, it's what Malcolm X said. If white people are cheering you as a black leader, you're doing something wrong. Last thoughts and speculations. Isaiah Thornton's Montgomery story tells us, if it tells anything, that human lives can only be examined in the larger context of their own times. Montgomery was assuredly not a man for all seasons. He did not speak for aspiring freedmen of his own generation, who still found hope for full citizenship in the forgotten promises of Reconstruction. Nor did he speak for unborn generations who, in a more opportune age after World War II, would help pull down the morally corrupt house of Jim Crow. Rather, like most other mortals, he was a man of his own era, in his case, a dark era of diminishing black opportunities. Among the earliest of the great black accommodators, he came of age amidst the confusion of the American Civil War and Reconstruction, and he spent the middle and later years of his life awash in a rising tide of radical white racism. Montgomery enjoyed some astonishing successes. In his personal life as both slave and citizen, he defied white stereotypes. Though slight and small of stature, weighing perhaps 135 pounds in middle age, he was every inch an aristocrat, an educated, articulate, prosperous planter businessman. Finding his people locked out of the American mainstream, he built, in the form of a small but symbolically important city of Mount Bayou, a separate and promising all-black world. If through the thicket of racial hate and violence that was Jim Crow, Mississippi, he did not find a path that balanced black dignity and progress with interracial harmony, it must be said that no other leader of his generation did either. Perhaps given the daunting constraints of his time and place, Montgomery's story should end with a question. Had he been born the year he died, soon after World War I, had he lived to experience the liberating forces that flowed across the American landscape after World War II, could anyone say with confidence that his gifted mortal today would be remembered as Mississippi's Booker T. Washington, its great accommodator? Not really. Look, we have seen time and time again that appeasement doesn't work. It simply says, well, once you've given us one thing, we'll take more. If black people in Mississippi and the South did not rise up and did not stand up, they would have kept pushing the envelope until black people agreed voluntarily to go back into slavery. It was never about just accepting second-class status. It was about going all the way back if they could. So anyway, please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. Also, I want to share with you the words of the Black Cop. Now, you can look this up online. The Black Cop was made by The Guardian, and it talks about a black cop who used his power. And I want to show you, this is the anthem of all black elites, the Talented Tenth. I joined because I wanted to be white. I saw that badge as a symbol. I'm one of you. I'm not one of them. I ignored some of the racism. I perpetrated some of it. Anyway, peace.